Victoria never imagined that one day I would leave her too. She always believed I loved her more than my own life, even to the extent of tolerating her dalliances with her so-called true love. What she didn't know was that our marriage, my devotion, and my role as her loyal husband were all tasks assigned to me by her mother-in-law. In reality, our relationship was nothing more than a business arrangement. There was no love between us. At 8 p.m., I once again reheated the dishes on the table. This was my third trip to the kitchen tonight. The pigeon soup I had specially prepared for my wife, Victoria, had gone cold, just like the dishes. Reheating the food over and over felt like a reflection of my heart, tortured night after night as I waited for her to come home. I sighed but didn't stop what I was doing. After reheating the food, I immediately began tidying up the house. I wiped the dining table until it was spotless and then took out the clothes Victoria would wear tomorrow, carefully ironing them. While ironing, I didn't forget to spray her favorite rose-scented perfume, a scent I remembered clearly. By the time I filled the bathtub and prepared a calming tea for her, it was already 10 p.m. Finally, the door opened and in walked Victoria, looking exhausted. I instinctively took her bag and knelt to help her change her shoes. Just as I was about to ask if she was tired, she cut me off, saying, "I'm going to shower first." She didn't even glance at me, her eyes glued to her phone screen. Occasionally, she'd smirk and let out a soft laugh. However, the moment she looked up and saw me, that smile vanished instantly. Victoria shrugged off her coat, letting it drop to the floor, and impatiently ordered, "Wash my clothes and change my perfume. The rose scent is so tacky, ugh." She rolled her eyes and walked into the bathroom. Soon the sound of running water echoed from inside, accompanied by her occasional giggles. I had grown used to it. Silently, I picked up her clothes and put them in the washing machine. For the fourth time tonight, I reheated the food. When Victoria finally emerged from the bathroom, she deliberately walked barefoot across the floor I had mopped multiple times, her damp hair dripping water everywhere. The once pristine house now looked disheveled. She fiddled with her phone, pressed the voice message button, and coyly said, "Good night, Ethan. You should get some rest, too." Then she glanced at the dining table and let out a derisive snort. "Same old dishes. Boring. I'm not eating." With that, Victoria turned and went upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. The loud bang felt like a hammer striking my chest, leaving me shaken. I looked around the house. Every corner bore the marks of my meticulous care and effort. But what was the point? No matter how much I did for our home, no matter how much I sacrificed for her, it would never compare to a simple good night from Ethan. This time, I didn't bother cleaning up the table. Instead, I switched off all the lights in the living room and sat on the couch in the dark. My phone buzzed with missed calls. I called back my mother-in-law, and as soon as the line connected, she anxiously asked, "Sincere, are you really planning to divorce Victoria?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I lay on the couch, my gaze fixated on our wedding photo. In the picture, I smiled humbly, trying to make Victoria happy, while she glared at the camera, standing as far away from me as possible. I chuckled bitterly, suddenly feeling utterly exhausted. "Aunt Margaret," I said, "Victoria and I got together in the first place only because of the collaboration between our families. Now that the business is stable and the contract has expired, there's no need for me to stick around and be an eyesore anymore." There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a faint sigh. "Sincere, I've seen how much you've endured over the years. You've always been the best son-in-law in my eyes, kind, reliable, and devoted. But Victoria, that girl has always been blind to her blessings. She's obsessed with that blonde-haired minor celebrity and doesn't appreciate you. Your parents are waiting for you overseas. Are you planning to go back? Should I try talking to Victoria again? She really doesn't know how lucky she is." As Margaret's voice droned on, I stared at the dark ceiling. Everything around me suddenly felt unfamiliar. 5 years ago, because of Victoria's casual remark about liking the city, I left my family and career behind. I bought this spacious apartment in the city to make it our marital home. I moved here, a place where I had no connections and endured all the challenges of starting over, believing that building a life with Victoria would bring happiness. But it was all an illusion. 5 years of reality had slapped me awake, teaching me that effort doesn't always yield results. I laughed at myself and politely interrupted Margaret. "Aunt Margaret, there's no need. It's time for me to go home." After hanging up, I drifted into a fitful sleep on the couch. Memories came flooding back. I dreamed of the day 5 years ago when it all began. 5 years ago, I returned to the country with my parents as our family's business expanded domestically. We needed the support of the influential Victoria family, and during a dinner meeting, I learned of a major collaboration between our families. It was also at that dinner that I saw Victoria again, the girl who had once been my childhood sweetheart. But the Victoria I saw then was nothing like the girl I remembered. She was frail, disheveled, and her hair was a tangled mess. Leaning against the balcony, I stared blankly into the distance, overwhelmed with frustration and sadness. From Margaret, I learned that Victoria had fallen for a boy band member named Ethan. Not only did she spend money to support his debut, but she also funded his album, sent him to South Korea for training, and followed him everywhere as they dove into a passionate 2-year romance. Victoria rarely came home during that time, chasing him around the world. But a month ago, Ethan suddenly announced his relationship with an actress on social media and blocked Victoria. She became desperate to contact him, even intercepting him at the airport to get answers. However, she was mistaken for an obsessive fan by his supporters, beaten on the spot, and sent to the hospital. From then on, Victoria spiraled into despair, drowning herself in clubs, parties, and alcohol, recklessly destroying her own body. As I listened to Margaret recount all of this, my gaze involuntarily followed Victoria's every movement. Yet it was clear Victoria no longer remembered me. Then Margaret's eyes lit up with a sudden idea. She suggested adding a clause to the contract. Since we're going to collaborate deeply, we can only build true trust between our families by becoming one. And so, partly for the sake of my family's business, and partly out of my own selfish desire, I abandoned my original plan to inherit the family business and signed a 5-year marriage contract with Victoria's family. I hid my true identity and began pursuing Victoria ardently under the guise of being a low-level employee. From that day forward, everyone knew that Victoria now had a devoted follower by her side, someone who loved her humbly, willing to do anything for her, and silently protecting her. Even though her heart belonged to someone else, Victoria didn't reject my kindness, but she never gave me a definitive answer either. Then, on the day of my 99th proposal, she held a wine glass, drunk and entrancing, and looked at me with a playful smile. She shattered the glass on the ground and, in front of everyone in our circle, crooked her finger at me and said, "If you're going to propose, you need to get on your knees to show sincerity. Don't you all agree?" The crowd immediately erupted in jeers. Victoria's close friend went even further, boldly mocking me, saying, "Compared to Ethan, you're nothing more than a loyal dog. Why should Victoria marry you without any sincerity?" I knew full well that Victoria was just making a spectacle of me for fun. But without hesitation, I knelt on one knee amidst the shards of glass. Blood instantly pooled on the ground. For the first time, Victoria looked panicked in front of me. She practically jumped up and threw herself at me in a tight embrace. On the yacht, fireworks exploded across the night sky, illuminating Victoria's clear, glistening eyes. I distinctly saw the reluctance and heartache in her gaze. For a moment I was captivated by her. I said, "Victoria, marry me. I promise to protect you for the rest of my life." Leaning against my shoulder, she nodded firmly. I knew our marriage was built on falsity, but I always believed her concern for me that night was genuine. I considered the possibility that Victoria didn't truly love me, but I also believed there was a corner of her heart reserved for me. I thought that if I just loved her enough, one day I might win her over. But later, I learned the real reason Victoria agreed to marry me. It was because Ethan had posted a picture on social media that day, showing off his proposal to someone else. After we got married, Victoria remained as wild as ever. She stayed out late every night, never providing me with her whereabouts. Then, when Ethan announced his divorce, Victoria disappeared for 2 whole months. She followed him to every stop on his tour, secretly funding his projects. When Ethan returned home for his birthday, Victoria went so far as to rent out an entire building to throw him a party. She even competed in a motorcycle race with a group of minor celebrities, which ended in an accident. When I picked Victoria up from the police station, she was so drunk she couldn't even stand. I stayed by her side all night, and yet she kept calling out another man's name. That was the moment I knew it was time to end the contract, and it was time for me to let go. The next day, Victoria finally woke up around noon. She frowned in displeasure when she saw the simple breakfast of porridge and boiled eggs on the table. "I want a sandwich. Go make me one," she demanded. I didn't move. Instead, I quietly sipped my porridge and replied, "We're out of ingredients. Maybe next time." I knew there wouldn't be a next time because my plane ticket was already booked. In a month, I would be gone for good. I just didn't want to argue anymore. Thankfully, Victoria didn't press the issue. She merely pouted before sitting down. Her eyes remained glued to her phone, occasionally letting out bursts of laughter. I didn't need to guess who she was chatting with so enthusiastically. I set my spoon down and waited for her to finish eating. Then I handed her the divorce papers I had prepared long ago. "Victoria," I said, "let's get divorced." My tone was flat, devoid of any emotion, as though I were discussing something utterly mundane. Victoria didn't even look up. Her smile lingered as she laughed at something on her phone, clutching her stomach from amusement. When she noticed me waiting, she glanced up and casually replied, "Sure." I chuckled bitterly to myself. I'd always known that Victoria didn't care about me. Now that Ethan was back, even the small amount of attention she used to give me had turned into complete indifference. I flipped to the last page of the contract and pointed to the blank space in the bottom right corner. "Just sign here," I said. "Okay," she replied, her tone impatient as if annoyed that I was interrupting her sweet moment. She frowned and gave me a sharp look, clearly blaming me for cutting into her conversation. She quickly returned to her messages. Without even glancing at the document, she signed her name. I watched coldly, not bothering to interrupt. Finally, I quietly put the contract away and said, "Once we get the divorce papers a month from now, I'll leave the country. Let's part on good terms." She replied, "Got it, you're so annoying." With irritation, Victoria waved her hand dismissively, stood up and dialed the number. Her expression softened as she spoke sweetly into the phone, leaving me with just her back. I couldn't help myself and called out, "Victoria, do you even know what you just signed?" Victoria froze for a moment and turned around with a puzzled look. "Isn't it just a business contract?" "I've already told you from now on you make the decisions about work. Don't bother me with it," she said impatiently, pinching the bridge of her nose as if issuing a final ultimatum. "Do you have anything else to say? If so, just get it all out at once and stop wasting my time." Typical Victoria, completely indifferent, taking everything I gave her for granted without the slightest regard for me. I smiled faintly. "No, nothing else. There won't be anything else from now on." In my mind, I thought, go ahead and be happy with Ethan. I won't stand in your way anymore. After I sent the divorce agreement to my lawyer, I headed to Sincere Corporation to finalize my last tasks and brief the vice president. The VP had been waiting in the office for quite a while. As soon as I arrived, he shook my hand and said, "Sincere, you're finally here. There's so much going on with the business, we need your guidance. It's rare to see you prioritizing work over your wife. Really, it's almost a miracle." As I organized some documents, I let out a faint chuckle. "Ex-wife," I corrected him. "We're divorced." The VP was stunned for a moment, then let out a knowing sigh. "You've done so much for her family over the years. Forget all the business support. You're a successful CEO who even cooked and did laundry at home. You went above and beyond for her, but she never even gave you a second glance. Honestly, I think the divorce is a good thing." I smiled bitterly. "Exactly. Outsiders like you can see my efforts. but the person I shared my life with couldn't care less. It's not worth it. That evening I returned home and began packing my belongings. Normally I never paid much attention to these things, but as I started sorting I realized just how little in this house actually belonged to me. In a home that I bought, every corner was filled with traces of Victoria. There were the stuffed toys I had won for her, the designer handbags I'd bought for her, the pink flowers she loved that I had painstakingly crafted into everlasting blooms, the rabbit-shaped lamp she adored, and the expensive paintings from her shopping cart that I had immediately purchased for her. Anything Victoria wanted, I would get for her without hesitation. Yet every time she received something, her reaction was a simple, indifferent "oh" before tossing it into a forgotten corner to collect dust. Over time, the house became entirely hers, with no room left for me. It wasn't until now that I realized just how insignificant I had been in this relationship. I called a moving company and had them take away everything that belonged to me. As for the unopened gifts I had given Victoria, I threw them all into the trash. If she didn't want them, I might as well get rid of them. By the time I finished moving everything, I was sweating profusely at the entrance to the neighborhood. Just then Victoria walked by with a group of people. Among them was Tiffany, one of her closest friends, who had always looked down on me. The moment she saw my disheveled state, her voice rose dramatically. Well, if it isn't Victoria's loyal watchdog, what's the matter? Did someone forget to leash you today? Instead of staying home to cook, you're out here wandering around? I ignored her and turned to leave. But Tiffany picked up a plastic water bottle from the ground and threw it at my head. "Hey, you trash collector. Are you deaf? There's a bottle here. Aren't you going to pick it up and sell it for some cash?" She burst into laughter, clutching her stomach. Ever since I started dating Victoria, her friends had never taken me seriously. They would humiliate me at every opportunity. And Victoria, seeing it all, never stepped in to stop them. Her silence gave them free rein to treat me like I didn't belong, like I wasn't worthy of their elite circle. In the past, I would have forced a smile and apologized to them, but not today. Today, I wasn't in the mood. "If I'm a trash collector," I retorted coldly, "then you'd be the first piece of garbage I'd throw into the dumpster." I turned to leave, but Tiffany grabbed my arm. "Who said you could walk away?" she snapped. I'd always played the role of the obedient pushover, bowing and scraping before them. My sudden defiance left this group of privileged heirs visibly rattled. Reluctantly, I turned back, only to find Victoria leaning against another man's chest, silently watching me. She finally spoke. "Trash collector, don't waste your breath. It's meaningless. Open your eyes and take a good look. Brother Ethan is back. Finally, the clouds have parted, and the moonlight is shining through. They're the perfect couple, a match made in heaven. Do yourself a favor and stop embarrassing yourself. Just leave already." The man next to Victoria gave me a once-over, his gaze filled with disdain. He had platinum blonde hair styled messily and was dressed in top-tier designer streetwear. His entire demeanor exuded an arrogant coolness, like a celebrity straight out of a magazine. No wonder Victoria had chased after him for so many years. Ethan extended a hand toward me, his expression smug despite his outward politeness. "Victoria's husband, right? Nice to meet you. I'm Ethan." Before he could finish speaking, Victoria grabbed his hand and stepped in front of him. "Ethan, don't misunderstand," she said with a sweet smile. "A few years ago, you left without a word. What was I supposed to do, not find someone to pass the time with? Husband? What husband? My heart has always belonged to you. Can't you feel how much I care about you?" As Victoria placed Ethan's hand on her chest, she gazed at him tenderly. The crowd around them erupted in cheers, their voices chanting, "Be together, be together." Among them, Tiffany, Victoria's close friend, seized the moment and suggested, "Brother Ethan just got back from abroad. He's unfamiliar with everything here. Why not let him stay at your place, Victoria? You can take care of him." She nudged me playfully and added, "Brother, you wouldn't mind, would you?" Victoria's eyes suddenly shifted to me. Everyone knew how deeply I loved her. I was agreeable about most things, But when it came to Victoria, jealousy would often consume me. Yet I chuckled softly and replied, "Sure, I don't mind." Hearing this, Victoria let out a visible sigh of relief. The group, with bottles of beer in hand, surrounded Ethan and escorted him to her house. They celebrated recklessly, completely ignoring me. Perhaps feeling guilty, Victoria came to find me alone later. "Sincere," she began, "you know Big Brother Ethan has been abroad for so long. I'd feel uneasy letting him stay by himself. He'll just stay at our place for a few days. Don't be petty and complain to my mom, okay?" I let out a cold laugh. "We're already getting divorced. What difference does it make if I tell her? And speaking of which, your first love comes back and you're all concerned about him being unfamiliar with the environment. Did you ever think about how I had to leave everything behind for you, learning to adapt on my own, how painful and difficult that was for me?" Victoria could be so thoughtful when it came to Ethan, but when it came to me, it was as if she couldn't see me at all. With a blank expression, I replied calmly, "It's fine. He can stay as long as he wants. I don't mind. After all, I'll be moving out for good soon." Victoria had anticipated that I might get angry or complain to her mom. What she hadn't expected was my indifference, as though we were discussing someone else's life, but she didn't dwell on it. Now was her chance to spend more time with Ethan, and that thought alone filled her with joy. Worried I might change my mind, she quickly moved Ethan's belongings into the largest bedroom the very next day. To her surprise, though, I didn't come home for an entire week. Victoria was thrilled. This gave her and her idol the perfect opportunity to spend time alone. She personally did Ethan's laundry, filling the balcony with his intimate clothing. She even started learning how to cook, bustling around the kitchen to prepare him heartfelt meals. For Ethan, Victoria eagerly embraced the role of a housewife, her face shiny with oil from the stove, but she relished every moment of it. Each day she posted on social media, though she kept her affection for Ethan subtle. She wrote things like, "Cooking for someone you like, getting burned is worth it. A simple 3-dish meal and a soup. Is this what home tastes like? So happy I could stay home every day." Unaware of the situation, someone commented, "Sister Vicky, are you finally falling for brother?" To this, Victoria quickly replied, "As if! He's not even worthy of my cooking." I let out a bitter laugh and refreshed the page, only to find the comment had mysteriously disappeared. Moments later, Victoria texted me, "Why haven't you come home? Where have you been this whole time? Big brother Ethan wants pig stomach and chicken soup. Hurry back and make it for him." I could easily imagine Victoria's irritated face as she typed the message. Of course, she wouldn't admit that she might have missed my cooking after going without it for a week. I knew all her favorite dishes and preferences by heart. No matter how complicated, I had always been willing to learn and prepare them for her. But after just 1 week of cooking for herself, she was already exhausted. For 5 years, I had quietly done it all for her without complaint. Thinking back on it, I made up my mind. When Victoria decided to call me, I didn't even wait for her call to go through. Instead, I quickly sent her a text. "I can't do it." Succinct and direct. Victoria was taken aback. She was used to me never saying no to her. This might have been the first time I'd ever refused her request. Before she could process it, I sent another message, this time with a photo, a hand hooked up to and forth. "I'm sick and in the hospital," I wrote. "I won't be coming back for a while." The hand in the photo was indeed mine, but the picture was years old. I wasn't sick at all. I simply didn't want to deal with her anymore. I had already decided on the divorce. There was no point in complicating things further. Victoria hesitated for a moment. Then she sent me a voice message, her tone laced with awkwardness and irritation. "Are you mute? Can't you just say you're sick? Stop acting like a dying man just to get my attention. It's so lame. Remember to take your meds. Don't go dying on me and turning me into a widow." I could faintly sense a hint of concern in her voice, but I quickly dismissed it. How could Victoria possibly worry about me? Her mind was full of Ethan. She probably wished I'd stay away forever, giving them more time alone. A few days passed and I finally returned home. I had left some important documents behind during my last move and needed to retrieve them. It was 8 p.m. when I unlocked the door. The first thing I saw was Victoria and Ethan sitting at the dining table enjoying dinner together. A heartfelt scene. I frowned and told myself that just one more week of endurance would bring me complete freedom. With that thought, I furrowed my brow and walked in. To my surprise, Victoria didn't scold me when she saw me. Instead, she invited me to dinner. She said, "Sincere, we're having hot pot today. I remember it's your favorite. After all, you're the man of this house. Come and join us." I was stunned. This was the first time Victoria acknowledged me as the man of the house in front of someone else, especially in front of Ethan, whom she was utterly infatuated with. Hearing her words, I couldn't bring myself to embarrass her, so I sat down next to the two of them. Throughout the hot pot dinner, Victoria barely ate a bite. She was busy running around, mixing Ethan's sauces, cooking his food, and piling his plate. Her eyes were practically glued to him. Ethan, with a half-smile, watched me as he leaned closer to Victoria from time to time, basking in an air of intimacy. He even let her feed him directly. I sat there coldly, saying nothing, merely eating from my own bowl. Ethan, seemingly annoyed by the lack of reaction, suddenly stood up, offering to serve me some soup. "Mr. Sincere," he said, "this nourishing soup was specially made for me by Victoria at 3 a.m. this morning. I think it's quite good. You should try it." He reached for a bowl, but his movements were clumsy, and the next thing I knew, the entire bowl of soup spilled. Victoria let out a sharp scream as she instinctively grabbed Ethan's hand, carefully examining it for burns. In the midst of this chaos, unnoticed by Victoria, the scalding soup splashed directly onto me. My chest instantly turned red and swollen. I held back my pain and didn't cry out, but I could feel blisters forming as the skin burned. The searing pain made me gasp quietly. "Sincere, are you okay?" Victoria turned towards me, her face full of panic for the first time. "How did it burn you this badly? Let's get you to the hospital right away." The worry and distress in her eyes were genuine, but I clenched my teeth and said nothing. Ethan interjected with a mocking tone. "It's just a few blisters. What's the big deal? Unlike me, whose hands are my livelihood. I'm not sure how I'll manage my upcoming concert tour with an injury like this." His words immediately drew all of Victoria's attention back to him. She rushed to his side, examining his hand again, where two barely visible red spots from splattered oil had appeared on his otherwise pale fingers. Ethan pushed her hand away with a faint sneer. "What's this little injury compared to your husband's burns? You should take him to the hospital instead of worrying about me." Victoria replied earnestly, "What nonsense are you talking about? Your hands compose music and play the piano. They're irreplaceable. Besides, you're a top idol. When have you ever suffered like this? No, I won't allow it. We're going to the hospital to get you checked out." Ethan's words and his sorrowful expression seemed to overwhelm Victoria. She grabbed his hand and started walking out the door. Then, as if suddenly remembering me, she turned around with a guilty look. "You know how important skincare is for someone like Ethan. I'll take him to the hospital. You can drive yourself there, okay?" I watched as Victoria clung tightly to Ethan, their figures disappearing from view. Only then did the pain in my chest hit me with full force. I immediately called my assistant and drove myself to the hospital to get the burn treated. When I arrived at the burn unit, I found the entrance heavily guarded by security. Ordinary patients weren't allowed in. A nurse noticed the severity of my burns and advised me, "Sir, the entire burn ward has been reserved by the Victoria family's princess. You'll need to visit another hospital. Don't delay your treatment." I heard her boyfriend got burned and she's been frantic all day. She spent tens of thousands of dollars reserving the entire floor and called in numerous renowned specialists for a consultation. Miss Victoria is madly in love. It's like something out of a romance novel. "Tell me about it," another nurse chimed in. "I caught a glimpse of them earlier. They're such a perfect couple, truly made for each other." I lowered my head and chuckled bitterly. A married woman taking another man to the hospital while leaving her own husband behind. And that man, a washed-up celebrity, Knew full well that Victoria was married yet still pursued her. A perfect match indeed. After my assistant and I found another hospital and got my wounds treated, I headed straight home. I packed my documents and was about to leave when I received a message from my parents. Opening it, I saw a video they'd recorded with friends abroad. The background showed the villa I grew up in, with my parents' kind smiles and my friends' warm greetings. It filled my heart with a rare sense of comfort. That was the environment I belonged to, the place where I could spread my wings and make my mark. 5 years ago, I signed a contract and moved to this unfamiliar city. Now, my parents are aging, and it's time for me to go back and take over the family business. I'm tired of this charade, tired of pretending to fit in with these wealthy second-generation elites. Over the past few years, I've established a strong foothold in the domestic market, but deep down, I know I'm a businessman at heart. It's time to return to the world of true ambition and success. I was finally able to showcase my skills, and even better, my parents and friends were supportive. This long-lost sense of support allowed me to exhale deeply, as if all the weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long had been released in one breath. At this moment, I felt an immense sense of lightness and freedom. I started living at the office to fully prepare for a remote project scheduled for the following week. I put my phone on silent and set it aside, focusing entirely on organizing the company's accounts. By the time everything was sorted, several days had passed. The moment I turned my phone back on, I noticed countless missed calls and messages. To my surprise, all of them were from Victoria. This left me utterly perplexed because until now, Victoria had never taken the initiative to contact me, let alone leave me so many messages. While I was still in a daze, an unfamiliar number called. Instinctively, I answered, only to be met with a furious voice on the other end. The person angrily shouted, "Watchdog, where the hell have you been? Do you have any idea how crazy Sister Vicky has been trying to find you these past few days? Don't think pulling a disappearing act will get you any attention from my sister. Let me tell you, only Big Brother Ethan is worthy of my sister. You're not even fit to tie her shoes. Stop dreaming." Before I could respond, Tiffany abruptly hung up, leaving me bewildered. Victoria was looking for me? Why? She was like the wind, free-spirited and unrestrained, someone who despised being tied down and never cared about my whereabouts. Could it be that her friend had made a mistake? But then I glanced at my phone again and saw the overwhelming number of missed calls, 99. All from Victoria. It seemed she truly was desperate to find me. Not wanting to leave any loose ends on my last day, I returned home, still puzzled. As soon as I stepped through the door, the housekeeper rushed out, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Sincere, thank goodness you're back. You have no idea what we've been through while you were gone." Miss Victoria was unhappy with the food we made, nitpicked everything about our arrangements, and even refused to let us do our jobs. She just told us to get lost and threw a massive tantrum. Shortly after, the butler also emerged, wiping his nose in tears as he launched into a lengthy complaint about Victoria's behavior. Only then did I piece together what had happened. It turned out that Victoria had grown accustomed to my care, and in my absence, she started taking her frustrations out on others. But so what? I was about to disappear from Victoria's life for good. No matter how much she struggled to adjust, she would have to face reality. I looked around at the mess, the trash scattered everywhere and the clothes trampled on the floor. I frowned, picked up a piece of clothing and placed it on the sofa. Suddenly, the sofa let out a faint creak. I glanced over and saw Victoria sprawled there, clearly drunk. "You still know how to come home, huh?" she slurred, her voice laced with annoyance. "Where the hell have you been all this time?" Standing tall, I looked down at her and replied calmly, "I had some business to attend to at the company. I was away on a business trip." Victoria furrowed her brows and said, "Since when were you so interested in the company? Didn't you always put me first?" It was true that I used to prioritize Victoria above everything else, but she had no idea that doing so was part of my work. Initially, I did have feelings for Victoria, but I also understood that such emotions were fragile and nowhere near as tangible as the benefits of business. If I couldn't have love, then I had to secure the interests I deserved in the commercial world. I hesitated. If it weren't for wanting to protect Victoria, I should have long since returned home to make my mark in the business world, rather than staying here as a house husband. But I couldn't share these thoughts with her. Taking a sip of water, I replied nonchalantly, "The company has been busy lately. I've had a lot to deal with." Victoria's anger seemed to hit a wall of indifference. Frustrated yet helpless, she pouted, "All right, I was wrong last time. I didn't mean to leave you hanging like that. But you know Ethan is sensitive. Celebrities like him are constantly in the spotlight. They can't afford even a scratch. And since he got injured at my house, I had to take responsibility. Don't be so petty. Besides, you were the one who agreed to let him stay in the first place. Why make a fuss now? Anyway, I've already asked him to move out. Can you stop being difficult and move back in?" Her tone carried a hint of reproach, and I knew why. My presence had forced Ethan to move out, ruining Victoria's chance to live under the same roof as her idol. But I didn't care. I gave a dismissive "oh" in response. Since Victoria didn't seem to have any urgent issues, I could leave without worry. Just as I turned to leave, Victoria called out to me. "Honey," she said, her voice unusually soft and sweet, with a rare hint of coquettishness. "I'm so hungry. I haven't had your cooking in ages. Could you make me something to eat?" I turned back and let out a dry laugh, pointing to the white bandages on my chest. "Have you forgotten? I'm still recovering from an injury." Victoria's eyes landed on the large bandages visible beneath my white shirt, and she froze for a moment. She had indeed forgotten that I was injured, and far more severely than Ethan. Covering her awkwardness with a cough, she said, "Of course I remember. How could I forget? I even got you a gift to make it up to you." With that, Victoria stood up, her fingers lightly tracing my chest before pulling down the strap of her silk robe. The air was charged with tension as Victoria stood before me, her demeanor unusually provocative. My gaze darkened. 5 long years. It had taken 5 years for Victoria to take the initiative to approach me like this. Although we were married, she'd always kept her distance, constantly belittling me, refusing to let me touch her, and banishing me to the study to sleep. Tonight I couldn't decipher whether her sudden boldness was an attempt to compensate me or a plea for forgiveness for neglecting me over her so-called true love. There was a time when I yearned for an intimate connection between us as husband and wife, but not like this. A wave of bitterness surged within me. The things I once desired now seemed utterly worthless. Victoria's sultry gestures failed to elicit any reaction from me. I remained impassive, showing no sign of interest. Panic flickered across her usually composed face. "Maybe tonight isn't the right vibe," she said nervously. "How about I take you out for a candlelit dinner another day? We can share a drink, and you're my husband after all. There are certain things we should prioritize." Before she could finish, her best friend Tiffany burst into the room uninvited. "Brother Ethan," she exclaimed with exaggerated cheer, pulling Ethan into the room behind her. "Victoria is crazy about you. How could she ever get angry at you?" Tiffany's eyes lit up when she took in Victoria's revealing outfit. "See, I told you. Victoria would do anything to win you back. She even learned a girl group dance just for you. And look at her, all dressed up like this." Ethan's cheeks flushed as his gaze swept over Victoria's disheveled appearance. She opened her mouth to say something but stopped, clearly at a loss. I lowered my head and let out a cold laugh. Then, without hesitation, I pushed Victoria, clad in her seductive lingerie, straight into Ethan's arms. "If this is for him, why be shy?" I said dryly. Victoria's face turned crimson as she buried herself in Ethan's chest, stealing a quick, uncertain glance at me. She couldn't figure out why I was behaving so generously tonight. Something felt off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Not that it mattered. She was already too lost in the warmth of Ethan's embrace. The room buzzed with excitement as Victoria began dancing sensually, completely immersed in the suggestive atmosphere. Applause and cheers erupted from the group of friends gathered around. Tiffany grabbed my arm, preventing me from leaving. Where are you going? Stay and watch. Open your eyes wide and see what a perfect match looks like, she taunted. It's time to give up and let go of Victoria. You two should just separate already. Tomorrow marked the final day of the mandatory cooling-off period before our divorce was finalized. With that in mind, I decided to stay. I settled into a dark corner with a glass of red wine, quietly observing as they flaunted their affection. The lavish penthouse had been transformed into a party hub. Champagne cascaded from a pyramid of glasses, crystal chandeliers sparkled, and pulsating dance beats filled the air. The crowd was intoxicated by the hedonistic atmosphere. In the center of it all, Victoria hiked up her silk nightgown, revealing her flawless, pale legs as she pressed herself against Ethan, performing a steamy dance. The wealthy young elites surrounding them cheered wildly, whistling and shouting. Victoria really went all out, someone jeered. The princess herself, who's mastered piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting, now dancing like this for brother Ethan. That's dedication, right? And see that necklace Ethan's wearing? That's Victoria's family heirloom, pigeon blood ruby, one of a kind. She gave it to him just like that. What a grand gesture. She's been chasing after brother Ethan for years. Even a stone would melt under that kind of devotion, let alone the fact that she's abandoned her pride as the princess to follow him around the world. She's even funded his concerts. This is next-level pursuit. Exactly. Brother Ethan, that celebrity you were linked to before doesn't hold a candle to Victoria. Just say the word, and she'd marry you on the spot. Yeah, kiss her. Make it official. Kiss, kiss. Amid the deafening chants, I remained composed, savoring my wine with an air of detachment. I simply watched as they egged on my wife and another man, urging them to declare their love. At that moment, my assistant entered quietly and approached me. Leaning in close, he spoke respectfully. Mr. Sincere, everything you need for your trip abroad has been arranged. The private jet your mother-in-law provided is ready, and you can depart in 2 hours. Is there anything else you require? Taking the file folder he handed me, I opened it just enough to glimpse the stamped documents inside. Relief washed over me. I exhaled deeply, my gaze sweeping over the frenzied crowd and the oppressive life I had endured for so long. In 2 hours, I would leave it all behind. My return to the life of a CEO and long-awaited freedom was finally within reach. The thought made the wine in my hand taste even better, its rich aroma soothing my soul. I smiled genuinely, shaking my head. No, nothing else. Let's prepare to leave. Then, as an afterthought, I added, oh, one more thing. I don't want anyone to know I've left. If Miss Victoria asks about my whereabouts, don't tell her. My assistant looked up at me in surprise, unable to hide his disbelief. Why bother saying goodbye? 5 years of doting on Victoria, going above and beyond, wasn't just because of our childhood bond. It was also because of the arrangement in the contract, her mother's hope that I could help her daughter move past the grief that had consumed her. Now the 5-year pact had come to an end. I had fulfilled the contract perfectly, and it seemed like Victoria had finally stepped out of her sadness. Her big brother Ethan was back in her life. Whether I stayed or left probably didn't matter to her anymore. I chuckled and explained, I don't want to stir up any unnecessary trouble. Don't tell anyone I'm leaving. Just do as I say. Through the deafening music, a sharp female voice suddenly rang out from behind us. Leaving? Where are you going? I turned around and saw Victoria standing there, looking utterly stunned. My brow twitched, but I quickly regained my composure. Pointing at my injury, I replied, It's nothing. My wound got infected, so I need to head to the hospital. Go find your big brother Ethan. A flicker of confusion passed through Victoria's eyes. She couldn't understand why Sincere had been pushing her away so much lately, as if he didn't care about her life at all. Just now she had called my name and I hadn't even noticed. She asked, Why do you keep pushing me toward Ethan? Her sudden question caught me off guard. For the past 5 years, every time Victoria had silently left me to see Ethan, Did I really need a reason? And now, what was the meaning behind her shocked expression? I didn't dwell on it. I smiled lightly and said, "Because I'm going to the hospital, and I can't hang out with you guys. Aren't you and Ethan close? Go have fun with him." My expression was calm, showing no sign of anything unusual. Though Victoria felt something was off, she didn't press further. Her friend Tiffany grabbed her hand and pulled her toward Ethan. The two of them started cutting the cake together. Ethan mischievously smeared a piece of cake on Victoria's nose, making her blush and lower her head shyly. The crowd around them erupted in cheers. Get together, they chanted. I stood quietly, neither stopping them nor joining in. Instead, I pulled out my phone to check the time. My flight was leaving in an hour. Let this be my last moment of solitude. But my silence in Tiffany's eyes seemed like utter despair. She deliberately thrust the microphone into my hand and demanded, "What's with that pathetic look? Are you upset seeing two people who are perfect for each other? Feeling like you've been reduced to nothing, unworthy of our sister Vicky? If you're smart, you'll step aside in front of everyone and let them be. We'll admire you for being a real man. So, what do you say?" Victoria frowned and was about to pull Tiffany away, but I took the microphone. I said, "All right. If Miss Victoria likes Ethan, I'll step aside and give them my blessing. I'll divorce her and make room for them." Victoria froze in place, looking utterly stunned, as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Everyone else was equally shocked. After all, my love for Victoria was something everyone in our circle knew. The marriage I'd begged for, how could I give it up so easily? Tiffany was the first to laugh. "Another pity act, huh? Last time you pulled this, you had Victoria worried for days. You think it'll work again? Let me tell you, it won't." Hearing this, Victoria's expression relaxed. I adjusted my clothes, stood up, and said, "The divorce papers are on the nightstand in the bedroom. Believe it or not, that's up to you. Best wishes to you both. I'm leaving." Without hesitation, I turned and walked away. For the first time, Victoria felt a pang of panic. She instinctively tried to convince herself that, as Tiffany said, I was just joking. But as she watched my determined back disappear, her heart pounded uncontrollably. She felt nervous but didn't know why. Ignoring everyone's attempts to stop her, she screamed at the top of her lungs, "Sincere, come back." But her voice was drowned out by the music and the people around her held her back. Tiffany said, "Big brother Ethan is still here. Why are you worried about him? Last time you let him fool you. Don't waste your time. Let's keep having fun." Victoria glanced at the disappearing figure and pushed her worry aside. Turning back, she threw herself into the party, thinking she could deal with everything later. After all, what difference would one more day make? Meanwhile, I had already arrived at the airstrip. With my headphones on, I boarded the plane. As the plane took off, I watched the city I had lived in for 5 years shrink into a tiny speck in the distance. Finally, I felt like the suffocating life I had been trapped in was over. Goodbye, Victoria. Goodbye, this city. Goodbye, this painful marriage. My life, Sincere's life, was about to begin anew. Leaning back in my seat, I allowed myself a small, relaxed smile and drifted into a deep sleep. Victoria continued laughing and partying with the group. They eventually headed to a beachside villa and partied all night. By the time she was worn out and returned home, 5 days had passed. The house was eerily empty. Out of habit, she called out my name several times, but no one answered. Only the housekeeper came out. "Where is he?" Victoria asked. The housekeeper handed her a cup of tea and took her bag before hesitantly replying, "Mr. Sincere hasn't been home for days. Maybe he's been busy with work." Angrily, Victoria knocked the tea out of the housekeeper's hands and stormed out of the house. It wasn't the first time Sincere had given her the cold shoulder and refused to come home. Last time, when Ethan got burned, Victoria had been thoughtful enough to send him countless messages. But not only did he not reply, he also sulked by staying at the office for ages without coming home. Victoria believed that by this point she'd already done everything to save face for him. Yet here he was, pulling another stunt, storming off without a word. His constant habit of running away from home was pushing her patience to its limits. As Victoria walked around the house, she suddenly felt that something was off. A lot of things seemed to be missing. The paintings on the wall were gone, many of the carefully arranged figurines and decorations had disappeared, and even the photo of the two of them hanging on the wall was nowhere to be found. That photo was something Sincere cherished deeply. No matter how messy the house got, he would always clean that photo until it sparkled. Yet now, it had vanished without a trace. A jolt of unease shot through Victoria's heart, her initial irritation morphing into a nameless dread. She began frantically searching the house for the things Sincere treasured, but after searching high and low, she realized with growing horror that all traces of him in the house had seemingly evaporated, just like he had. Out of breath, Victoria stopped to collect her thoughts. Then, she suddenly recalled something Sincere had said at a party a few days ago. Her mind raced as she dashed into the bedroom and opened the nightstand. There it was, staring back at her, a document. The moment her eyes landed on the title, the blood drained from her face. The words divorce agreement were printed in bold letters at the top. With trembling hands, Victoria flipped to the last page to check for signatures. When she saw her own signature on the line for the wife, her legs gave out and she collapsed onto the floor. Her mind buzzed emptily, unable to process what she was seeing. Her signature, it was unmistakably hers, not a photocopy, not a forgery. She had signed it herself. But when? Desperately searching her memory, a particular moment came rushing back to her. It was that day during dinner. Sincere had handed her a contract, his expression calm and unassuming. At the time, she had been busy chatting with brother Ethan and hadn't even glanced at the document before signing. Could that have been the divorce agreement? Victoria's hand clenched the document tightly, crumpling it in a fit of rage and disbelief. She balled it up and hurled it into a corner with all her strength. Divorce? Sincere had actually initiated a divorce? How utterly ridiculous. Had he forgotten how he had begged her to marry him? How he'd knelt on shattered glass, his knees bleeding, swearing in front of everyone to love her for a lifetime? Did the last 5 years mean nothing to him? 5 years of him desperately trying to please her, learning to cook, doing laundry, bending over backward for even a fleeting smile from her. And now, just because brother Ethan had returned recently, he was suddenly overcome with jealousy. How laughable. Victoria was convinced that this was just another one of Sincere's temper tantrums. Once he'd vented enough, he would come crawling back on his own. She didn't bother with the divorce agreement because she was absolutely certain there was no one else in the world like Sincere. No one else would love her with their whole being, would stay by her side no matter what. Perhaps sensing Victoria's foul mood, the housekeeper tactfully avoided mentioning Sincere's name in the days that followed. It wasn't until Victoria's best friend, Tiffany, showed up unannounced at her house that the silence was broken. Tiffany barged in, finding the place in complete disarray. The curtains drawn, pillows strewn across the floor. With her hands on her hips, Tiffany demanded, "Where's that useless Sincere? Why hasn't he cleaned up this mess?" The housekeeper hesitated before replying softly, "Mr. Sincere hasn't been home for a few days." Tiffany raised an eyebrow in surprise. "He hasn't come back? At the party the other day, I thought his talk about divorce was just a joke. I mean, come on, a guy like Sincere could never hope to reach Victoria's level. Who'd actually have the guts to divorce someone like her?" The housekeeper added a few more details, even mentioning the divorce agreement in the nightstand. Hearing this, Tiffany grew increasingly bothered as she pieced things together. She turned to look at Victoria, who was lying listlessly on the couch, her face blank, as if lost in some dark reverie. Tiffany couldn't help but think, without Sincere in the picture, Victoria could finally be with brother Ethan openly, a perfect golden couple, envied by everyone. But because of Sincere, their social circle had been thrown into chaos. The more she thought about it, the more Tiffany resented Sincere. Grabbing Victoria's hand, Tiffany tried to coax her. "Good riddance. Now that the dead weight is gone, isn't it time to think about your future with brother Ethan?" I've been dreaming of the day he becomes my real brother-in-law." Victoria suddenly shoved her away, causing Tiffany to stumble and land on the floor. Knowing her place, Tiffany didn't dare protest against Victoria, the ever-dominant princess of the family. Still, she pressed on. "Victoria, Sincere has already divorced you. Isn't this the perfect chance for you and brother Ethan to be together? Why not just go for it?" Victoria's expression darkened, her voice icy as she snapped, "Who said we're divorced? Our business is none of your concern." But Tiffany's words, coupled with the fact that Sincere's phone had been unreachable for days, forced Victoria to confront the reality she had been avoiding. Sincere was serious about the divorce. This wasn't just a childish game. Fury erupted within her. Victoria swept everything off the table with one angry motion, sending the items crashing to the floor. For years she had given Sincere more respect and dignity than he deserved. And now he dared to turn around and demand a divorce? Unbelievable. She thought for a moment and immediately contacted her company's assistant, instructing them, "Tell Sincere to stop hiding at the office and come out. Call him and tell him to hurry home." The assistant on the other end of the line seemed well prepared and responded confidently, "Miss Victoria, Mr. Sincere has already resigned from his position as the general manager of the domestic branch. He hasn't been in the office for a long time, and we can't reach him." Victoria angrily hung up the phone and pulled out her own mobile to dial his number. As expected, it went unanswered. Not giving up, she grabbed Tiffany's phone, the housekeeper's phone, and everyone else's phones to try calling him. But each time the same ethereal female voice reminded her, "I've disappeared. Sorry, the number you are dialing is no longer in service. Please try again later." It turned out that Sincere hadn't just blocked her, he had outright canceled his phone number. Victoria's mind was a chaotic mess, a mixture of suffocating frustration and anger. She stormed out of the house, recklessly running through several red lights, aimlessly driving around the city. By the time she calmed down, she realized she had no idea where to start looking for him. All she knew about Sincere was that he had started at their company as a low-level employee. But she had never asked him where he was from, where he lived, or what his family background was. She didn't even know what hobbies he had. Reluctantly, she decided to visit the Victoria Group headquarters. Although she was the company's princess, she had never been involved in the family business, and stepping into the office made her feel a bit out of place. When she met the vice president of management, she respectfully asked, "Uncle Lee, do you know where Sincere is recently?" The vice president, being someone in the know, glanced at her briefly before returning to his work, replying mockingly, "You've been married to Sincere for 5 years, and now you're coming to the office to look for him? I have no clue where he is. His office is right next door. Go take a look yourself. Don't tell me you don't even know where he works." Victoria was left speechless. She indeed didn't know where his office was. With the guidance of an assistant, she finally found Sincere's office. It was a spacious room, but inside was a small folding bed and some of his personal belongings. Victoria suddenly remembered how often, in her fits of anger, she had told Sincere to leave and sleep at the office. This place had practically become his second home. A pang of guilt flashed through her eyes. She never realized how miserable Sincere's life had been outside her sight, but now in this vast world, she had no idea where to find him. Gazing out the window at the glittering city lights, she suddenly felt an overwhelming sadness. There were countless lights shining in the night, yet not a single one was left on for her. A flood of memories washed over her, how Sincere used to wait up for her no matter how late it was, always leaving a light on for her. Only after losing it did she realize how precious that warmth had been. But now Sincere had left her without hesitation. Why? While Victoria was lost in thought, unable to make sense of it all, her phone rang. It was her mother, Margaret. "Victoria, come home. There's something we need to discuss as a family," Margaret said with a sigh. "Now that you and Sincere are divorced and your situation with Ethan is causing such a stir, maybe you should." "Mom, I'm not planning to get a divorce," Victoria interrupted impatiently. Margaret was stunned into silence for a moment before replying, But Sincere already sent the divorce papers to the house. Didn't you know? Hearing Victoria's silence on the other end of the line, Margaret began to piece things together. Victoria didn't even know that their divorce was already finalized. Victoria stared at the photo her mother sent of the divorce certificate. A suffocating sense of anger and frustration rose in her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had thought Sincere had only signed the divorce agreement, but in reality a whole month had passed, and the final divorce certificate was already issued without her knowledge. She hadn't even been aware that the 1-month cooling-off period for the divorce had passed. It hit her like a ton of bricks. Sincere had already planned to leave her a month ago, and she had been blissfully unaware. Victoria felt a wave of sorrow wash over her. On the other end of the call, Margaret sighed. Back when you were heartbroken over Ethan's return and even harmed your health, I asked Sincere to comfort you. And now Ethan has come back into your life. Watching you two patch things up, I thought maybe. That's nonsense, Mom, Victoria interrupted sharply. I didn't agree to the divorce. She didn't know why, but the mention of Ethan stirred a deep unease in her heart. She felt restless and uncomfortable. Though their 5-year marriage had been hanging by a thread, Victoria had grown used to having Sincere by her side. The thought of completely losing him irritated her in ways she couldn't explain. On one side was Sincere, who loved her unconditionally. On the other was Ethan, the idol she had once chased after so fervently in her youth. The scales tipped back and forth, and she couldn't make up her mind. Sensing her daughter's hesitation, Margaret sent over a contract. Victoria opened it without much interest, but as she read, her eyes widened. At the bottom of the business marriage agreement, the signature was none other than Sincere's. Victoria screamed in shock, "Mom, what's the meaning of this?" Hearing her daughter's hysterical reaction, Margaret was deeply distressed and finally decided to reveal the truth. She said, "You've probably forgotten, but Sincere is the same boy from the Sincere family you used to tease as a child. You two grew up together as childhood friends. He only left for abroad when he was 8. He came back because he saw you in so much pain and wanted to help you recover. I also thought he could help pull you out of that heartbreak. Besides, the Sincere family needed the support of the Williams family, and this business marriage was quickly agreed upon. Sincere only had to stay with you, Victoria, for 5 years, helping you move past your heartache. After 5 years, you two could part ways and go on with your lives separately." Margaret paused for a moment and continued. "To be honest, Sincere has done an incredible job. He gave up his pride, his identity as the young master of his family, and devoted himself entirely to your well-being. There was even a moment when I thought he might stay by your side forever. I started seeing him as my real son-in-law. But who could have predicted? 5 years passed, and you remained indifferent, continuing to do as you pleased, so much so that you even brought Ethan back home to humiliate him. So when he finally asked for a divorce, I couldn't blame him." Margaret's voice on the other end of the phone was still chattering away, but Victoria felt a deafening roar in her ears, drowning out everything. She opened the business marriage contract, reading it word by word, over and over, hardly believing her own eyes. Could it be that Sincere's unwavering love over the past 5 years was all part of the agreement? Was it just a contract, a promise he was fulfilling? But she couldn't forget the passion and emotion in his eyes the day he proposed. That couldn't have been fake, could it? If he didn't love her, how could he have taken care of her during every drunken night, cooking meals and feeding her sober-up soup with such patience? If he didn't love her, how could he have endured the humiliation from her friends and willingly stayed by her side? But the agreement didn't lie. The white letters on the black paper clearly outlined everything Sincere had to do for her, down to every detail, from cooking and laundry to not interfering in her personal life. It was all meticulously listed. The more Victoria read, the colder her heart became. It turned out that every act of kindness from Sincere was prearranged, planned from the very beginning. What Victoria had taken as his special affection for her was void of any genuine feeling. The faint hope she had clung to in her heart was completely shattered. Her heart twisted in pain, and she couldn't hold back anymore. She broke down and cried uncontrollably. Margaret, on the other end of the line, was stunned. In her memory, her daughter had always been proud and aloof, looking down on almost everyone. Even when Ethan ended their relationship, she hadn't cried like this, without any regard for her dignity. Margaret tried several times to comfort her, but the words stuck in her throat. Matters of the heart, she thought, could only be understood through personal experience. It wasn't until Victoria had cried herself out that she choked out a question. "Mom, you must know where Sincere is now, don't you?" Hearing the longing in her daughter's voice, Margaret sighed deeply, not just because Sincere had asked her not to reveal his whereabouts, but also because it was part of the agreement. Legally, she was bound to keep it a secret. "Victoria," Margaret replied. "I promised him I wouldn't say." After another helpless sigh, she added, "Besides, Sincere is meticulous in his planning. Even if you find out where he is, what would it change? He's always been someone who thinks 10 steps ahead. He must have anticipated this situation long ago. When I asked him if he would return home to manage the family business, his answer was vague. Honestly, I don't know where he is now either." Victoria's last sliver of hope crumbled. She had never imagined Sincere would leave so completely, so resolutely. He had entered her world so suddenly, and now he had left without a word. She hung up the phone in a daze and sat silently in the empty living room, her mind blank. Just then, her phone rang. Instinctively, she picked it up. On the other end, someone said, "Sister Vicky, where are you? Brother Ethan is in trouble. You need to come quickly." When Victoria arrived at the bar, she saw a group of people surrounding Ethan. She didn't recognize them, but she immediately recognized the woman standing at the front. It was Crystal, the woman Ethan had publicly announced as his fiancée. Pushing through the crowd, Victoria approached, but her friend Tiffany quickly grabbed her arm. "Sister Vicky, you're finally here. These people are causing trouble for Brother Ethan," Tiffany exclaimed. As Tiffany's words fell, everyone's attention shifted to Victoria. Crystal shot her a piercing glare, her eyes practically drilling a hole through her. Victoria, feeling inexplicably irritated, frowned and asked, "What is a washed-up star like you doing here?" Crystal let out a cold laugh. "A washed-up star? And what are you, a shameless woman clinging desperately to someone else's husband? Do you enjoy chasing married men so much?" Victoria's anger flared. Over the past 5 years, though she had often pursued Ethan, she had never crossed the line. Even when giving him gifts, it had always been in public, never in private. Crystal, on the other hand, was more than just a former celebrity. Behind her public image as an unsuccessful actress was the truth. She was the heir to the prestigious Crystal family, managing international business affairs from abroad. She was still busy attending business school when Victoria and Ethan fell in love while working on a project together. Their romance blossomed quickly. Later, Crystal decided to leave the entertainment industry to focus on earning money for her family. However, the demands of her job and their differing career paths created a rift between her and Ethan, which gave Victoria an opportunity to slip in. By the time Crystal realized what was happening, she hired someone to investigate, only to learn that while she was busy working, Ethan and Victoria were traveling the world together, spending her money and indulging in a carefree, extravagant lifestyle. The two were so engrossed in their romance that they completely disregarded her position as Ethan's wife. Crystal, a proud and accomplished woman, had never endured such humiliation or betrayal. The thought of it all filled her with rage. Ethan had publicly claimed that they were already divorced, but in reality, Crystal had no knowledge of this. It was merely a one-sided declaration from Ethan, which she neither acknowledged nor would ever accept. With icy determination in her eyes, Crystal confronted Victoria. "Miss Victoria, you come from a distinguished family. How could you stoop to such despicable behavior? You're married, yet you still seduce someone else's husband. Truly impressive," she said coldly. Crystal's words made Victoria's face flush red with embarrassment and then pale with anger. Clenching her fists, Victoria blurted out, "I'm already divorced." Gasps filled the room. Ethan was especially shocked, staring at Victoria in disbelief. The realization that she had truly loved him enough to divorce her husband overwhelmed him with guilt. Ethan had always known about Victoria's obsessive love for him, but he never reciprocated her feelings romantically. After marrying Crystal and moving abroad, the lack of shared interests and growing distance between them made him realize the value of Victoria's unconditional devotion. Her willingness to sacrifice everything for him seemed rare and precious. Slowly, he found himself drawn to her admiration and adoration. To Victoria, Ethan was not a fading star but a radiant, untouchable celebrity. She showered him with thoughtful gifts, nestled in his arms like a delicate woman seeking comfort, in stark contrast to Crystal, who was fiercely independent and capable, often overshadowing Ethan and leaving him feeling emasculated. Even though Victoria had been married for years, Ethan believed that a mere beckoning gesture from him would bring her back to his side without hesitation. Their illicit encounters grew more frequent until Ethan, unable to resist any longer, decided to return to the States without telling Crystal. He wanted to test himself, to figure out whom he truly loved and with whom he wanted to spend the rest of his life. To him, his previous marriage felt like an experiment, not a definitive conclusion. Upon returning, Victoria showered him with even more affection, disregarding her own husband entirely. Ethan even provoked her husband on several occasions. Yet Victoria always stood by his side, even offering up their family home for him to stay in. However, the longer Ethan stayed with Victoria, the more he realized that he harbored no romantic feelings for her. What he felt was gratitude and guilt, not love. Despite their outwardly scandalous appearances, he never truly saw her as a partner. He wanted to explain this many times but feared hurting Victoria. Now, hearing that Victoria had divorced for him, Ethan felt an even deeper sense of pain. At that moment, Crystal stepped past Victoria and threw her arms around Ethan. "Honey, I've neglected your feelings for too long. I'm sorry for leaving you alone. I promise I'll be better. I'll spend more time with you. Come home with me, please. After all, we're still married, and there's always a chance to start over. Don't you think so?" Tears glistened in her eyes as she looked at Ethan with vulnerability, a stark contrast to her usually tough demeanor. This rare moment of softness stirred something in Ethan. He had loved her deeply once, and even now he couldn't bring himself to push her away. Victoria, panicked, cried out, "No, big brother Ethan, you can't go back to her?" She was desperate. Sincere had already left her, and now she couldn't bear to lose Ethan too. She had been devastated once by his departure, and she refused to repeat that heartbreak. Tiffany, her best friend, chimed in supportively. "Brother Ethan, after all this time, can't you see that Sister Vicky is the one who truly cares about you the most?" Ethan looked at the tearful Crystal in his arms, then at the anxious Victoria, and let out a deep sigh. It was as if he had finally made up his mind. "Victoria," he said gently, "thank you for all the love you've shown me over the years, but I've always seen you as a little sister." Victoria froze, stunned. "No, that's not true," she stammered, her voice trembling. "From the moment you debuted, I've loved you. I've supported you, voted for you, treated you as my idol. I did everything just to be by your side. How can you reject me?" Ethan gently pushed her away, his voice turning cold. "I know how much you've sacrificed for me, but there's always been a barrier between an idol and a fan. What you see in me might be a version of me painted with rose-colored glasses. The truth is, I'm weak and indecisive, incapable of rejecting others. But Crystal, she's the one I've truly loved. I'll always remember your kindness, but if I continue to lead you on, it would be wrong of me. Besides, Sincere truly cherishes you in a way I never could. I'm not worthy of you. I'm sorry for all the trouble I've caused." With that, Ethan turned and walked toward Crystal, leaving Victoria standing there, shattered and speechless. "From now on, let's go our separate ways and never meet again." As Ethan's final words fell, Victoria could almost hear the sound of her heart shattering. Crystal left with him and a group of others, leaving Victoria alone to drink by herself. She downed over 10 bottles in one go, drinking until she was vomiting and unconscious. It wasn't until Margaret brought her home that she was finally forced to stop. When Victoria woke up, she screamed for more alcohol and refused to eat, punishing herself. Being abandoned again and again pushed her to the edge of despair. Margaret was both anxious and heartbroken, but utterly helpless. Once, Sincere had been the one to pull Victoria back from the brink, but this time there was no one there to save her. To make matters worse, footage from the bar's surveillance cameras was leaked online by some nosy bystander, quickly landing on the trending list. At the time, I had just wrapped up my 6th meeting of the day. A friend barged into my office with a gleeful look and handed me his phone. "Isn't this the princess of the Victoria family? She's trending now because of some old scandal," he said excitedly. I glanced at the screen and responded with a nonchalant, My friend, clearly expecting a stronger reaction, looked deflated and probed, "Doesn't this bother you at all?" I turned back to my computer, resuming my work, and replied matter-of-factly, "Why would it? It has nothing to do with me anymore." 5 years ago, my friends had all witnessed the whirlwind of events I went through for Victoria. I had knelt on broken glass for her, married her, played the role of a devoted husband, and, in the end, endured a very public and messy divorce. They thought I had left the country out of heartbreak, so when they saw the video of Victoria's meltdown, they felt vindicated on my behalf. But I was as calm as ever, leaving them unable to decipher how I truly felt. My friend elbowed me and grumbled indignantly, "After everything she put you through, I still get angry just hearing about it. Honestly, I feel like kicking her while she's down." I shook my head and let out a helpless laugh. Honestly, the moment I went abroad and returned to my family, I had wiped the slate clean. I had completely moved on from the past. That evening, my friend and I went out for dinner. As we were about to part ways and head home, he suddenly raised his phone in excitement and interrupted me. "Sincere, is your ex-wife out of her mind?" Frowning, I took his phone and read the news headline. My breath caught for a moment as I realized what he meant by out of her mind. After our divorce, Ethan had broken up with Victoria again. This time, he publicly announced on his social media that he and his wife had reconciled. It turned out they had never actually divorced and had only been going through a temporary marital spat. Victoria, unaware of the situation, had poured her heart and soul into the relationship, only to end up with nothing. Seeing Ethan flaunt his love online pushed Victoria over the edge. The once glamorous princess of the Victoria family had completely fallen apart. She now stayed holed up in her house, refusing to leave, wash her face, brush her teeth, or even eat. She had begun self-harming and taking non-prescription drugs. Without my patience and support, Victoria had spiraled into a state where she was unrecognizable. Paparazzi had stealthily captured photos of her, revealing a gaunt figure with sunken eyes and brittle yellowed hair. She no longer resembled the pampered heiress she once was, but rather a destitute vagabond. Victoria began to regret losing me. Countless times she tried to track me down, but my departure had been meticulously planned, leaving no trace for her to follow. Frustrated, she let herself sink deeper into despair. She frequently showed up at the Victoria family's company, causing scenes and interrogating anyone who might know my whereabouts. Her antics led to the company repeatedly trending online, severely damaging its reputation. She even sought out old friends, confronting anyone who had ever mocked me and taking her revenge one by one. In particular, she targeted Tiffany, her former best friend, and set her up in such a way that Tiffany was forced out of the Victoria family's company and blacklisted from others. She was left to scrape by at the bottom of the social ladder. Victoria's erratic behavior was both shocking and pitiful. Meanwhile, I remained focused on my work, driving peacefully as if I had never known her. From the day I signed our marriage contract, I only ever saw her as a clause to fulfill. I had been eager to complete my obligations so I could walk away. After securing all the resources from the Victoria family's company, I had no further plans involving them. Even when Margaret asked about my future intentions, I simply smiled without answering. 5 years of swallowing my pride had positioned me to fully invest in my career. I no longer cared about anything related to Victoria. Besides, I was long gone. What was the point of putting on a show now? Victoria was nothing more than a nominal ex-wife to me. Her current attempts to display affection were laughable at best. My initial concern for her had stemmed from a fleeting sense of youthful infatuation. Deep down, I had never truly loved Victoria, so how could I possibly still care? After dropping my friend off, I drove home alone. The Sincere family's business had now successfully expanded domestically, and I was preparing to venture into the renewable energy sector. My recent days had been consumed with discussions about the future of this field with like-minded peers. My schedule was packed with meetings and invitations to speak at prestigious universities and forums. One day, after finishing my usual tasks, I attended an energy-focused forum at an Ivy League university. Accompanied by my assistant, I arrived just in time. Suddenly, the room erupted into applause. I thought it might be some big shot arriving in person to share the latest industry insights. But the moment the applause died down, I froze in my seat, completely stunned by the person standing on stage. The glowing figure up there was someone I knew. The girl on stage must have noticed me as well because she flashed me a brilliant smile and said, "Sincere, long time no see." My surprise was genuine because the girl on the stage was none other than Wendy, a girl from a struggling background whom my family had sponsored. Wendy was the same age as me, but she had lost both her parents at a young age and grew up in an orphanage. The first time I saw her, I was captivated by the defiant look in her eyes and asked my parents to sponsor her. I thought to myself that a girl with such a fighting spirit would surely make something of herself one day. What I didn't expect was that my small act of kindness would allow a fragile sapling to grow into a towering bamboo forest, lush and vibrant. Over the years, I heard bits and pieces about Wendy from my family. They said she excelled academically and was solely focused on her studies, with no other extracurricular distractions. Seeing her now so accomplished, I felt a sense of pride for her. Wendy's gaze burned brightly as she looked at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. My kindness had changed the course of her life. She'd once resolved to study hard and repay me when she grew up. However, after earning her PhD, she discovered online that I had already married Victoria. Wendy felt a pang of regret but wholeheartedly wished me happiness. Yet, after learning about the things Victoria had done to me, she began to feel heartbreak for someone as kind as me, believing I didn't deserve such pain or outcome. After the conference ended, Wendy and I talked for a long time. Eventually, we fell into a comfortable silence, like old friends reconnecting after years apart. She looked up at me, then quickly averted her gaze and asked, "Mr. G, what are your plans for the future?" I shook my head silently and said, "I'll manage the company well and try to expand our family business. As for my personal life..." My voice trailed off, tinged with uncertainty. I truly had no expectations for my personal life. After experiencing 5 years of marriage with Victoria, I wasn't eager to start over, meet someone new, and begin a new relationship. Deep down, though, I still hoped for a happy life but had no idea where to begin. Wendy's eyes sparkled as she looked at me. She thoughtfully handed me a plate of perfectly cut steak and said, "Someone as exceptional as you deserves a much better life. Rest assured, whether it's in business or in other areas, I'll always support you." I smiled and nodded. I later recruited Wendy to join my company. In the blink of an eye, another year passed. Through our joint efforts, the GI Corporation finally reached the milestone of going public. Watching the cheers of the employees below, I was overwhelmed with emotion. My hard work hadn't been in vain, and everything I had done had been recognized. It was a deeply gratifying moment. Family and friends gathered to congratulate me. "Sincere congratulations on the IPO. Mr. G, your future is limitless." Their heartfelt blessings made me feel truly validated, and a warm current rose in my chest. I was so happy that I drank a few glasses too many. Amid the hazy atmosphere, Wendy reached out and held my hand. We exchanged smiles, and in each other's eyes we saw love. A month later, I decided to take Wendy back to my hometown. I felt that in the end one should always return to their roots. Although Wendy had no parents, she was born and raised in her homeland. Before deciding to marry her, I wanted to bring her back to see where it all began. When we returned to the coastal city, old friends and colleagues quickly heard the news. Some came to curry favor, while others were former collaborators who wanted to reconnect. During a dinner gathering, they all marveled at how my business had flourished abroad over the years. Seeing how affectionate Wendy and I were, they expressed their joy for us. As the conversation flowed, the former vice president of my old company suddenly spoke up. "You wouldn't believe it, but Victoria came looking for me recently, asking for your address." It had been so long since I'd heard Victoria's name that for a moment I felt disoriented. The vice president, however, was drunk and kept rambling. "After the way she treated you back then, how could I possibly tell her where you are?" "Fat chance." I chuckled and politely wrapped up the gathering before heading back to the new villa Wendy and I had purchased. Although our return home was brief, I wanted Wendy and me to make regular trips back, so I had prepared a new home for us as a base in the country. I took Wendy around to explore the city, accompanying her on shopping trips to make up for all the leisure time she had missed in the past. By the time our hands were full of shopping bags and the car's trunk was nearly overflowing, we finally returned home to rest. Meanwhile, in the old Liu family residence, Victoria sat staring at a wedding photo of us, lost in thought. It had been 3 years since our divorce, yet she still couldn't forget me. She had mobilized everyone around her and exhausted all her resources, but she still couldn't find any trace of me. The wedding photo in her hands was something she had salvaged from the trash, a solitary relic of our relationship. In the photo, Victoria stood far apart from me, but he laughed heartily. If she could go back in time, Victoria would have held Sincere tightly when they took that photo and told him that he was the one she truly loved. Yet, it wasn't until Victoria had gone through so much that she realized the kindness Sincere had shown her was the thing she couldn't let go of, the thing she missed the most. At first, she thought Sincere was nothing more than a comforting balm after she left Ethan's side. She believed that Ethan was her true love. But when Sincere really left, Victoria finally realized how unaccustomed she was to life without him. Only then did she come to understand this was love. Before, with Ethan standing between them, Victoria had always ignored her own feelings, unwilling to admit that she had already fallen for Sincere. Now that Sincere was gone, she finally turned back to cherish what she had lost. Victoria downed another bottle of wine. A knock came from the door. "Miss Victoria, are you attending tomorrow's business forum?" Over the past few years, in her search for any trace of Sincere, Victoria had started taking over the family business. She knew he wouldn't give up his career, and perhaps in some corner of the world, she might find him again. Victoria also hoped to improve herself, to become more of a match for Sincere, to show him that she had completely changed, that she was no longer the reckless, spoiled princess she used to be. She wanted him to see her in a new light. So Victoria began attending various business forums and conferences. This time was no exception. On the other side of things, I also received an invitation and saw her name on the list. The moment I saw Victoria's name, I froze. Wendy, noticing my reaction, tried to comfort me. "If you don't want to go, I can attend alone," she offered. I squeezed Wendy's hand, smiled, and shook my head. "It's fine. I knew this day would come the moment I decided to return. Besides, I have nothing to hide. Why should I avoid her? My life has moved on to a new chapter, and I've long let go of the past. I owe nothing to the Williams family, and I owe nothing to Victoria. We're just strangers now, so there's no need to run away." On the day of the forum, all the prominent CEOs in the city gathered at the venue. Victoria was among them. Over the years, she had become adept at managing her family's business and navigating these social circles with ease. Holding a glass of wine, she mingled with the other elites, exchanging pleasantries. As she chatted, Victoria couldn't help but wonder, Was this how Sincere had been 5 years ago? Constantly moving between different groups of people, balancing his work and personal life. Back then she had demanded that Sincere be by her side at all times, always on call. He had to juggle both his job and her whims. She couldn't fathom how he managed to do it all so well. Lost in her thoughts, Victoria suddenly realized that the simplest things from the past were now what she longed for the most. Just then a familiar voice reached her ears. Victoria froze as if struck by lightning. Her entire body trembled. She quickly turned toward the voice, and with just one glance she was rooted to the spot. It was him, the man she had searched for day and night, the one who haunted her dreams. Sincere still looked the same, tall, with striking features. But unlike the gentle demeanor he once had, there was now a calm confidence and authority in his expression. He stood in the center of a group, speaking with ease, exuding composure. Victoria couldn't contain herself. Overwhelmed, she called out instinctively, "Honey!" I was in the middle of raising my glass when I heard the voice. Before I could react, someone suddenly collided with me, throwing themselves into my arms. It was Victoria. She clung to me desperately, her eyes brimming with tears. "Honey, honey, I knew you couldn't leave me." I tried to push Victoria away, but Wendy was quicker. She stepped forward and firmly pulled Victoria off me. "Please, ma'am, have some respect," Wendy said coldly. The friends around us who had witnessed the scene frowned in disapproval. One of them spoke up, "Victoria, stop making a scene. You two have been divorced for years." "What right do you have to call him honey?" I brushed off my wrinkled suit, visibly annoyed. Wendy, as my fiancée, was already reminded of all the outrageous things Victoria had done in the past. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. But this wasn't the place to cause a scene, so Wendy suggested, "Let's go downstairs to the cafe and talk." Victoria nodded absent-mindedly, following us to the cafe like a lost soul. Seeing me holding another woman's hand, the man she had dreamed of for so long, was almost unbearable for her. She felt as if she couldn't breathe. When we were together, I never even glanced at another woman. But now, my eyes didn't linger on her for even a second. Sitting across from me, Victoria had so much she wanted to say, but when she opened her mouth, only one question came out. "Sincere, why did you divorce me back then?" I hadn't expected such a foolish question. Taking a sip of my coffee, I calmly replied, "I fulfilled my part of the contract. Naturally, I left to start my own life." Tears filled Victoria's eyes as she shook her head in disbelief. "I don't believe it. I don't believe that everything you did for me during those years was just because of a contract. Have you ever felt even a moment of affection for me?" Victoria's entire body trembled as she asked the question. She was desperate to know my answer, but terrified of hearing me say I had never loved her. I met her gaze steadily and said, "No, I never felt anything for you." I continued explaining, "From the moment our families signed that agreement, our relationship was strictly a partnership. We were bound together only for the sake of family interests. I've always reminded myself of that. It was nothing more than fulfilling a contract. In fact, the moment I signed it, I had already prepared the divorce papers." To be honest, I did have a certain image of Victoria in my mind back then. After all, she was the carefree, lively girl I'd known as a childhood friend. And yes, when I was younger and inexperienced in love, I might have felt a fleeting attraction to her beauty. But I was always clear-headed about what our relationship truly was, a mere arrangement. Did I ever try to love her? Perhaps, but I'm only human. My heart isn't made of steel. Being treated the way Victoria treated me hurt. It made me sad. While I was trying to make things work between us, she repeatedly left me to meet Ethan. That forced me to calm down and face reality. I reminded myself again and again that I was merely fulfilling a contract. Over time, I shut off any lingering feelings I might have had for her. 5 years later, I don't hate her. If anything, I'm just relieved. I feel freed. Hearing my words, all the color drained from Victoria's face. I said to her, "Let me make this clear one last time. I never loved you. Not 5 years ago. Not now. and there will never be anything more between us. Besides, I'm engaged now, and I'm truly happy. I hope you won't interfere with my life anymore." I spoke bluntly, not caring how she would react. I just wanted to end this conversation and get back to the banquet to take care of work. Victoria stood frozen in place as I walked away with Wendy. By the time she came back to her senses, we were already far off, and the coffee on the table had gone cold. The forum proceeded smoothly, and I was the centerpiece of the event. Many business tycoons sought to curry favor with me. That evening I couldn't avoid attending a dinner gathering. As the meal concluded, a waitress came in with a basket of fresh flowers. She said, "Mr. Sincere, these flowers are from Miss Victoria. She sent them to celebrate your return to the country." I barely glanced at them before instructing my assistant to return the basket. I said, "Please let Miss Victoria know that I don't accept flowers from anyone other than my fiancé." Looking at the lilies in the basket, I couldn't help but laugh. Perhaps Victoria had forgotten lilies were Ethan's favorite flower. I only liked irises. The other attendees, sharp as they were, immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere. The previously jovial mood turned awkward. The waitress stood there, unsure whether to leave or stay, and was eventually ushered out by some well-meaning guests. But Victoria wasn't deterred. She sent gifts almost every day, flowers, trinkets, or artisanal desserts. Yet none of it ever reached me. My assistant disposed of them all on my instructions. Finally, one day, she stopped me on my way home from work. She asked, "Why won't you accept anything I've sent? Do you hate me that much?" I let out a cold laugh. "Yes, I do hate you. My dear ex-wife, what's with this sudden display of affection? Do you find it amusing? Back then, didn't you find me a nuisance, always in the way of your sweet moments with Ethan? Now that we're divorced, why don't you pursue your dreams boldly? Why cling to me now?" Victoria's eyes turned red, and her voice choked with emotion. Panicked, she stammered, "No, Sincere, I didn't agree to the divorce. It wasn't until you left me that I realized I never truly loved Ethan. The one I really care about is you. I was blinded by Ethan's aura, mistaking admiration for love. But I know better now. Sincere, I'm sorry. Can we start over, please?" "Start over," I scoffed. The memories Victoria cherished as heartwarming were, for me, nothing but painful. I had no desire to revisit those times. Coldly, I pushed her away. "You think you can't live without me? That's just because you've lost a servant who catered to your every whim. It's nothing more than your loneliness eating at you. You've never understood love, Victoria. You, a spoiled princess, can't even grasp the difference between love and mere affection. You don't deserve anyone's love." My words cut deep, and her face turned pale. As the pampered daughter of the wealthy William, Victoria was used to others listening to her. Few had ever seen her so defeated. But I didn't care. This was the truth, and I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. Without another word, I walked past her and got into my car. I had decided to visit Margaret, my former mother-in-law. Despite her initial manipulations in having me sign the contract, she had been kind to me during those 5 years. In fact, she had even offered support to my family business when we needed it. So both emotionally and logically, I felt it was only right to pay a visit to Margaret. Back then, in order to help Victoria find her footing again, Margaret came up with this plan. But to be honest, it was like drinking poison to quench thirst, a temporary fix with long-term consequences. Margaret's overindulgence in her daughter meant she never taught Victoria how to treat others with genuine equality or how to truly respect and nurture relationships. At the time, because of the overwhelming influence of the Williams family, I had no choice but to sign that contract. As an outsider, there was nothing I could do to change the situation. I sacrificed 5 years of my life to fulfill Margaret's wishes, but now I've grown. I'm no longer the naive boy I once was. I've become a man of standing, with my own love to cherish. There's no way I'll compromise again, let alone sacrifice myself for anyone else. Margaret looked at the man standing before her, who had grown into someone mature and dependable, and felt a deep sense of regret. Men like him, steadfast and reliable, were a rare find these days, especially one whose family matched the social standing of the Williams family and who was successful in his own right. If only Victoria had woken up back then and chosen Sincere instead of endlessly chasing after Ethan, the Williams family would now have such a promising son-in-law. Margaret thought to herself, if he's willing to join our family now to start over with Victoria, that would be the perfect solution. We would wholeheartedly support it. However, after hearing Margaret's words, I refused outright and said, Margaret, when the Sincere family returned to the States to expand our business, you helped us a great deal. These gifts are a small token of my gratitude. Please accept them. But as for anything beyond that, I'm afraid I can't help. I ask you not to put me in a difficult position, I continued. I'm no longer the inexperienced boy I once was. Now, I hold influence in my hands and am a rising star in the business world. My tone was no longer one of submission as I spoke to Margaret. She was taken aback at first, then silently swallowed her words with a sip of tea. Just as Wendy and I were leaving the Williams estate, we ran into a drunken Victoria. She looked at me with wide, hopeful eyes and asked, Sincere, did you come here just to see me? I looked down at her and replied flatly, No, I didn't. Your mother wanted me to give up my life once again to take care of you, as if I were still a pushover for anyone to manipulate. I think she's overestimating her chances. Victoria's breath hitched. She suddenly remembered the contract from 5 years ago, as well as everything I had done for her during those 5 years. My unwavering patience, my sacrifices, giving up my dignity and career. Most people wouldn't have endured Victoria's constant mood swings and difficult behavior, but I had stuck it out for 5 long years, patiently staying by her side until she recovered emotionally. Thinking back on those days, I could hardly describe how grueling it had been. Victoria's heart filled with guilt, her nose tingling as tears welled up in her eyes. She lowered her head and softly choked out, I'm sorry, Sincere, But before she could finish, I took Wendy's hand and walked away. Perhaps our last conversation had finally made Victoria give up. In the following weeks, she didn't try to interfere with Wendy and me again. That was until an industry gala. I brought Wendy along, hoping to introduce her to some friends. But shortly after we arrived, an incident occurred. Sincere, what makes you think you belong here? A sharp voice interrupted my conversation with an old acquaintance. I turned around to see Tiffany, her face twisted in anger. It turned out that, after being targeted by Victoria and unable to find work, Tiffany had taken up a job as a waitress. She was now serving drinks at this very gala. Looking at me standing there laughing and chatting effortlessly, her eyes were filled with resentment. She blamed me for the downward spiral of her life. She believed that my sudden departure had angered Victoria, who then took it out on her, ultimately leading to her current situation. Thinking about the hardships she had endured over the years, Tiffany was consumed with rage. She grabbed a steak knife from the tray she was holding and charged at me. I've had a miserable life, so you shouldn't get to live happily either, she screamed. I instinctively tried to dodge, but out of the corner of my eye I saw Wendy standing frozen in shock. Alarm bells went off in my head. Without hesitation, I turned and shielded her with my body. In the blink of an eye, I felt a sharp pain as the knife plunged into my back. Security reacted quickly, restraining Tiffany and disarming her. Blood seeped through my dark suit, but I endured the pain and checked Wendy for injuries. Seeing that she was unharmed, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. Hearing the commotion, Victoria arrived, followed closely by the host of the event. Seeing an invited guest injured, the host was furious. He turned to Victoria and said through gritted teeth, Miss Williams, your friend is truly well-mannered. I recall she caused a scene at Sincere's farewell party before he went abroad, and now she's pulled this stunt. What exactly are you trying to do? All eyes turned to Victoria, her face alternating between pale and flushed. I stood silently, my gaze cold and full of disdain. Tiffany seized the opportunity to scream, It's all your fault. If you hadn't disappeared, Victoria wouldn't have taken it out on me. I wouldn't have ended up as a waitress. Back then, Tiffany had clung to Victoria, benefiting from the crumbs of her wealth. The pocket money Victoria casually discarded was enough to sustain her. Through Victoria, she had gained access to high society, befriending heiresses and imagining a future as a socialite. Now she earned a meager monthly salary, barely enough to cover rent, leaving her with nothing. I sneered, "How laughable. You were the one who helped Victoria bully and humiliate me back then. Now that something has gone wrong, you're putting all the blame on me. Who do you think you are?" My voice carried a commanding tone. And Tiffany finally realized that the man standing in front of her was no longer the powerless, insignificant office worker he used to be. She lashed out angrily, "You filthy dog. So what if you look respectable now? Weren't you the one we trampled on like a doormat before?" Victoria bit her lip and snapped, "Shut up," with a loud slap. Victoria struck Tiffany across the face. Tiffany shouted in disbelief, "Victoria, I'm standing up for you, yet you treat me like this? Sincere may be in power now, but he's just someone from the bottom rung of society. How is he good enough for you? He's nowhere near as good as brother Ethan. Don't let him fool you." Tiffany's words were filled with anguish, but Victoria furrowed her brows, quickly covering Tiffany's mouth and warning her to be quiet. She glanced at the security guard standing nearby and ordered, "This lunatic is spouting nonsense, and you're just standing there? Drag her out." With that, Victoria directed the security guards to take the hysterical Tiffany away. Then she crouched down beside me and said, "Sincere, are you okay? I'll have someone take you to the hospital." I really didn't expect her to show up and I interrupted her, my expression cold. "Victoria, I'll remember what happened today," I said sternly. "Tiffany wasn't here for me, was she? And how could someone so familiar just waltz in here? Did you have a hand in this? You should be grateful that my fiancé wasn't hurt, otherwise you'd be in serious trouble." My words were firm, and everyone present could see the truth clearly now. It had all been orchestrated by Victoria, and her target was Wendy. The sheer audacity of someone to stoop so low was enough to make everyone take a sharp breath. Margaret, her face pale, said, "Sincere, we will give you an explanation for this. Whatever the cost, our family will compensate." I ignored her and left with Wendy for the hospital. That night, the Victoria family villa was in chaos. Tiffany lay on the floor, her body covered in whip marks, her skin torn, her eyes vacant, and her voice barely audible. Victoria, on the other hand, was gasping for breath after delivering the punishment. Margaret was pacing in circles, fretting. "What good does it do to beat her, Victoria? Do you even realize who you're dealing with? The Sincere family is not someone we can afford to offend. How are you going to explain this? The Sincere family is at the height of their power, while our family has been declining over the years. If others were eager to curry favor with us before, now that we've offended him, it's going to be hard for anyone to want to work with us." William, who had just returned home, was furious when he saw the scene. He slapped Victoria hard across the face and scolded, "I raised such a useless child. You're a disgrace to the Victoria family." Glancing at the battered Tiffany on the floor, he instructed, "Get her out of here. Find a way to make her disappear completely from New York. We've already offended Mr. Sincere. This must not happen again." Victoria tried to stop him, pleading, "Papa will, even if Tiffany made a mistake. You can't just disregard her life like this." Seeing his daughter's inability to grasp the gravity of the situation, William let out a heavy sigh of disappointment. "Our family has been prominent for years, and now it seems all of that will be destroyed by you. All you think about is love and men, without any sense of responsibility or ambition. And you, Margaret, you're no better. You've spoiled her so much that she's become completely useless. Look at the mess she's created now, and all the trouble she's caused before. If you keep this up, I won't recognize her as my daughter anymore. Everything in this family will be handed over to your brother instead." William's stern words shocked Victoria into silence. "Get out," he bellowed in anger. But what he didn't expect was my swift retaliation. Within days, the Victoria family's long-standing business partners and allied families began to cut ties. Some even willingly paid penalties to terminate contracts. A week later, the Victoria family's stock value plummeted, leaving them on the brink of bankruptcy. And this was just a small warning from me, a reminder to William that I was waiting to see his sincerity. William returned home and summoned Victoria, who had been confined to her room, along with Margaret. He said there was an important announcement to make. His piercing gaze swept over the two of them before he finally spoke. "Margaret, from now on, you'll go to Australia to retire. Don't come back here again." His words left Margaret dumbfounded. Before she could respond, he continued, "As for you, Victoria, all your shares have been reclaimed by me. To the public, you're no longer my daughter. From now on, you're on your own. I won't care about you anymore." William's declaration left both mother and daughter in stunned silence. They couldn't comprehend how such a minor incident could provoke such a severe response. Victoria asked, "Papa Will, I'm your daughter. How could you say you're cutting ties with me?" Margaret pleaded, "Honey, we've been together for so many years. Are you really telling me to leave and never come back? You're breaking my heart." However, no matter how much the mother and daughter caused a scene, Papa Will's expression remained unchanged, his eyes filled with ruthlessness. Compared to the ties of family before him, the William family's business could not falter under his watch. And when weighed against vast wealth and prosperity, everything else was merely disposable. He declared, "It's settled. Leave now. The William family doesn't welcome you." His words left the mother and daughter pale-faced, collapsing onto the ground. They never expected that I, with my far-reaching influence, had already risen to such heights. News of my restructuring of the William family enterprise quickly spread in the elite circles. Everyone remarked on how determined I was to show no mercy to my ex-wife or the William family. At that moment, Wendy was helping me pack my luggage. She asked, "Are we heading back so soon?" I wrapped my arms around her from behind and laughed. "Why? Don't you want to go back and get married?" Blushing, Wendy said no more. Our month-long return home had brought about countless events, making Wendy truly understand my feelings for her. She agreed to my proposal, and I, too, no longer wished to stay in Ocean City. Victoria's persistent entanglements had grown tiresome. My life was so wonderful now that I couldn't bear to waste any more time on someone like her. As we lingered in an embrace, Wendy suddenly remembered something, holding up her phone to show me. "Do you remember that actor, Ethan?" I paused for a moment. Of course, I remembered Ethan and his wife, who had moved abroad and left the entertainment industry. I hadn't followed any news about him since then, so I naturally didn't know what had happened. She said, "Ethan passed away, just yesterday." I was stunned and leaned closer to look at her phone. The news reported that Ethan had died at home the previous day, the cause being a family dispute. Apparently, after moving abroad, Ethan and his wife continued to argue over the matter involving Victoria. During one heated argument, his wife accidentally pushed him down the stairs, leading to his tragic death. Reading the news left me sighing in disbelief. Ethan and I had little direct conflict. After he left the country, I hadn't given much thought to him or his wife. But the news made some things clear. The root of Ethan's marital discord likely still revolved around Victoria. Had it not been for her relentless pursuit of Ethan, a pursuit known to everyone, the situation might never have escalated to this point. When word got out that I was taking Wendy abroad, our friends insisted on throwing us a farewell party. The night was full of laughter and celebration. As the evening wound down and we were about to head to the car, a vehicle behind us flashed its high beams. "Sincere, I want to talk to you." The driver was Victoria. With a determined gaze, she blocked the road with her car, causing a cacophony of honking from the vehicles behind her. Seeing her unwavering stance, I feared she might harm Wendy, so I reluctantly got into her car. Victoria started the engine and sped off. Neither of us spoke until she brought the car to a stop in front of my house. Finally, she broke the silence. "Sincere, if it weren't for that contract, if Ethan hadn't been in the picture, would you have been with me?" I froze for a moment, almost doubting my hearing. But the look in Victoria's eyes, filled with hope, told me she was waiting for comforting words. Instead, I smiled and calmly replied, "With or without the contract, no matter who you pursued." "We would never have ended up together." Victoria's head lowered slowly. I continued, "Besides, you were so infatuated with Ethan, so much so that everyone knew it. How could you possibly have noticed me? Don't act as if you regret it. Do you even know what I like to eat, what my hobbies are, or what my real temperament is? You know nothing about me. Don't talk about loving me, it's laughable, really. All you cared about was my selfless devotion, the years I spent lavishing you with unconditional kindness. You're just bitter because you're no longer the center of someone's world. But do you even understand what it means to truly care for someone? To unwaveringly support them, to give everything for them, to stand against the whole world for them? Do you know what responsibility means? What perseverance means? You don't even understand accountability, so don't claim you understand love. You're unworthy." With each word I spoke, Victoria's face grew paler. If she had even a shred of genuine feeling, she wouldn't have let me down repeatedly over the past 5 years, breaking my heart time and again. She wouldn't have cheated during our marriage, running off to others over and over again, causing a family to fall apart because of her. I have my own life now. I have someone I love. "Please don't disturb me again," I said firmly. With that, I left Victoria standing there, stunned. Tears streamed down her face as though her heart was breaking into pieces. She knew she'd lost her chance and had no reason to try and hold on to me anymore. Just then, a blinding light forced me to shield my eyes. It was followed by Victoria's scream and the screech of brakes. Sincere. When I came to my senses, I saw Victoria lying in a pool of blood and Tiffany standing there, looking utterly lost. It turned out that Tiffany, in her despair and madness after escaping the William household, had sought every means to find me and exact revenge. That's how tonight's tragedy unfolded. She blamed me for changing her fate, for the William family's decision to eliminate her. Tiffany wanted me dead, wanted me to pay with my life. But in the crucial moment, Victoria pushed me out of the way. I fell to the ground. It was just a minor scrape for me, but Victoria was knocked solidly to the ground. She closed her eyes as she fell. I quickly called the police, but it was already too late. Victoria had been gravely injured. She was rushed to the hospital where she remained unconscious. It took an entire day of resuscitation before she was finally out of critical condition. However, the doctor said she would be bedridden for the rest of her life, dependent on tubes and machines. Tiffany, who had intentionally caused the accident, was immediately arrested and sent to prison. The Victoria family pulled some strings, ensuring Tiffany would not escape harsh treatment behind bars. After the incident, I went straight to the hospital with Wendy. Seeing Victoria, her body battered and unrecognizable, left me overwhelmed with mixed emotions. We were no longer connected, yet she had risked her life to save me. Had she really given up her own life for mine? I sighed deeply, unwilling to dwell on the thought. Victoria had lived her entire life as a princess, always expecting love without ever needing to give it. But it was something I said to her in the car that day that changed her. It compelled her to reach out, to act. Yet this attempt at redemption came far too late. What good is love that arrives after everything is lost? Still, she had been gravely injured for my sake. I changed my flight and patiently waited for her to regain consciousness. It wasn't until a week later that Victoria finally woke up, when she learned she'd be confined to a bed for the rest of her life and that Tiffany had been the one who hit her. She showed little reaction. Instead, she simply looked at me with tear-filled eyes, remaining silent for a long time. Her gaze shifted to a bouquet of irises on the bedside table, and she smiled faintly, as though letting go. For 5 years, whenever I got angry, Victoria would give me a random bouquet of lilies to placate me, and my anger would dissipate instantly. She thought I loved lilies, but after we divorced, in her desperate attempts to find traces of me, she learned through friends that I was actually allergic to lilies. I didn't love them. It was Ethan who loved lilies. But because they came from Victoria, I always accepted them with a smile. It wasn't until much later that Victoria discovered I loved irises, yet in all our 5 years together she had never realized it. The mismatched flowers became a metaphor for the failure of our marriage. She had never truly cared about me. Like the wrong flowers at the wrong time, we were two people who met under the wrong circumstances. Whether or not others came between us, Victoria's lack of attention had already caused her to lose me. As Victoria looked at me, memories of that day on the yacht surfaced. I had knelt on shards of glass and proposed to her with a sincerity I could never fake. She knew I wasn't good at lying, and that moment of raw honesty had been real. But when had she lost me? When had love slipped through her fingers, never to return? A wave of sorrow engulfed her as she realized our story was truly over. Late regrets led to uncontrollable tears. Only now did she understand that the feelings of longing, remorse, and heartbreak she felt were what it meant to love someone. Victoria had fallen in love with me, but only when it was utterly impossible for us to be together. She finally recognized her overwhelming love, but it was far too late. Her sobs were uncontrollable, yet she managed to force a smile. Through her tears she choked out, "Sincere goodbye, forever goodbye." I returned home with Wendy. On the plane, I received news that Margaret had passed away. After being sent abroad, she heard about Victoria's accident, and the shock caused her to collapse. With no caregivers around, by the time she was taken to the hospital, it was too late. Listening to the updates, I could only sigh at the twists of fate. Everyone eventually pays the price for their actions, some in ways that are painful, others in ways that are irreversible. The Victoria family was no exception. Entangled in scandal and losing two key members, the once flourishing family fell apart overnight. William, drowning in debt, was forced to sell the company to pay off creditors. On the day the Victoria family held a press conference to announce their bankruptcy, I caught a glimpse of Victoria on television. She was in a wheelchair, dressed in mourning clothes, holding a white funeral wreath. Her eyes were empty, devoid of any light. People approached her one by one, offering their condolences, but she seemed not to hear them. She remained completely still until the moment the coffin was about to be carried away. Then she erupted into wailing sobs, nearly fainting from the grief. "Mom," she cried out, "you were the only one in the world who truly loved me. Now both you and Sincere are gone. What am I supposed to do?" Victoria's heart-wrenching cries eventually caused her to collapse. I turned off the television. The once pampered daughter of the Victoria family was now disabled. Her mother had died tragically, and the illustrious Victoria family had crumbled entirely. It was heartbreaking to witness, even for me, but karma had taken its course, and I had nothing more to say. I proceeded with my plans to marry Wendy. Surrounded by family and friends, we shared a joyful kiss at our wedding. Afterward, Wendy continued her research work while I focused on my career. With aligned values and shared goals, every day of our life together was sweet and fulfilling. One winter evening, as the first snow fell, Wendy excitedly announced, "You're going to be a dad." We embraced, watching the snow drift softly outside the window, welcoming this new chapter of our lives. The warmth of that moment filled me with peace. But just then, a phone call shattered the tranquility. It was a friend from back home. He told me that Victoria had passed away. She had ended her own life in the hospital. "There's a letter for you, a final one. Do you want to read it?" I glanced over at Wendy, who was busy cooking, and shook my head. "No, burn it," I said. "There's no such thing as a remedy for regrets in life, and there's no turning back either. Victoria's life was her own. Whatever decisions she made, I had no right to interfere. There's only one thing I know: we have to move forward. After the divorce, we're just strangers. And why would I read a stranger's letter? I don't want to look back, nor do I want to accept a love that comes too late." The snow had stopped. I hung up the phone and walked back home. From behind, I wrapped my arms around Wendy, my hands resting on her belly, feeling the blossoming of a new life. I said, "We're going to be happier and happier." I kissed Wendy, my voice steady and certain. I believe it. After the storms, what awaits us will surely be clear skies.